In my previous life, I hated Mark for getting drunk and stealing my innocence. When leaving, I am so determined that I don't even want a child. Later he died in a fire trying to save me. Open your eyes again. I went back to the day of my divorce. When I ran back from his competitor's celebration party. He was celebrating his son's birthday. Mark stood there, looking at me solemnly. Dead silence in the eyes. I rushed over and hugged him. I don't want a divorce anymore. He was stunned for a moment. I look gloomy. You can torture me however you want. But today is my child's birthday. Can you have a piece of cake with him? Please. There seemed to be a sizzling sound of burning skin in my ears. Blazing fire. Distorted everything. Firefighters breaking down the door. Mark, who has always been a clean freak. Hold on top of me. Resisting the flames desperately. Even the last moment of life. He's still apologizing to me. After being rescued. The son I never wanted to be close to. Crying like a tearful person. Hold my hand. Trembling, I comforted my mother, don't be afraid. I raised my hand to wipe away the tears on my son's cheek. But drooped down. Until the last moment before death. I didn't have time to treat the two most important people in my life. Showing love. Open your eyes again. I can still feel the despair of that moment. The noise of celebration fills my ears. Ethan's joyful eyes caught my eye. I am very happy today. Clinking glasses. He looked down at me. Explore with a little ambiguity and celebrate your divorce. Divorce. My pupils suddenly widened. I was reborn into the year when I hated Mark the most. This was also the year he and I divorced. Previous life. I don't know Mark well. Once when he was drunk he raped me. The video went viral in the entire circle. But I already have someone in my heart. This stain. Let me just hide my love. Under pressure from home. And outside rumors. I had to marry him. After marriage, I never treated him well. No matter how he wants to make up for it. I used the sharpest words to hurt him. We became a couple of enemies. Later I found out. That drunkenness was a plot against him. He is also a victim. There is no forced marriage. Everything is just a lie made up by my parents to achieve their goals. After the misunderstanding was resolved. I haven't had time to get along with Mark yet. He died in the fire because of me. Under Ethan's slightly frowned brow. I put down my glass in a hurry. Pulling the skirt and running out. Nancy. Ethan's voice was already unhappy. I have no time to care. I'm going to see Mark. And my son. I didn't have time in my previous life. This lifetime. I want to love them well. I've never driven a car so fast. The past flashed before my eyes. This is the day Mark and I filed for divorce. It is also my son Frank's birthday. I rejected my son's birthday request. I think this is just Mark's way of trapping me. She turned around and dressed up to attend the celebration party of her first love Ethan. Drink until the sky turns white. I came out with Ethan's help. I saw Mark sitting in the car. He seemed to have been on guard all night. The cigarette on my fingertips has burned out. Looks cold and silent. In my memory. Mark never smokes. This is also the first time I saw Mark, who has the final say in the business world. Such a humble and pitiful expression. But I hate him so much. Turn around and leave. Nancy. He got off. Walking towards me with a desolate look. Dawn. All thoughts are silent. His eyes were bloodshot. I lowered my eyes and whispered, Frank has been waiting for you all night. Can you say happy birthday to him? I pulled the corner of my mouth. Mark taunted. Is it interesting? I said at the moment I signed the divorce agreement. I don't want you and your son anymore. At first. You forced me to give birth to him. How else would I have given birth to a son of a rapist? Mark was speechless. Silence for a long time. He said sadly, I was sorry for you that day. That's enough. I don't want to see you again. Get out of here. I glared at him with red eyes. After that day. I never saw Mark again. Until his son was kidnapped. I just got back in touch with Mark. Later. I just found out. I'm just an arrow shot at Mark by someone else. Sweat is oozing out of my palms. A familiar sight is coming. The car drives into the garage. An emergency brake. My heart feels like it's about to jump out of my chest. I can't wait to open the car door. 100-meter sprint. When I saw Mark's cold and outstanding face. Tears rolled down silently. Mark stands in the shadows. looking at me solemnly. Dead silence in the eyes. Like a lonely grave. My son saw me. The black grape-like eyes suddenly brightened up. Frank has a clear voice. Proudly. Dad. Look. I said my mother is back. I muttered, Frank. Frank is full of anticipation. I asked my mother carefully if she came back to celebrate my birthday with me. I am in the 2nd month after marriage. Discovered that she was pregnant. I was so depressed at that time. I have complained, cried, and made a fuss. Finally, under the coercion of Mark. Give birth to this child. I hate Mark. So I don't even want to look at this child. When he was born, she was left to the care of a nanny. Maybe it's the mother's instinct. Watching him grow up little by little. I can't help wanting to get close to him. But when I think about how he came here, I hate myself so much. Gradually, I'm even afraid to see this child. So I deliberately distance myself from him. Treat him coldly. So that later, it made him become autistic. I walked towards my son with a guilty conscience. Mark stood in front of me. Holding my hand with restraint, he has a birthday today. Don't tell him about our divorce. What? Did he think I was going to tell the kids about the divorce? Frank poked his head out from behind. Eyes blinking curiously. When he looked at me, he became cautious again. Dad, what are you talking to Mom about? Can't Frank listen? Mark gently touched his head. Dad and Mom have something to talk about. Can you cut the cake obediently? Frank hung his head in disappointment. I can't help it. Looking at me furtively. Mark and I went to the balcony. He stood in the shadows. Swallowed by darkness. There is a dark cloud in my eyes that cannot be dispelled. I couldn't help but walk towards him. He took a step back. Our distance is never far nor close. But what he said. But not as cold and self-restrained as him. Are you so happy about divorcing me? You specially wore the skirt given by the person you like and ran over to show me that you are happy now. What? I was stunned. His eyes fell on my golden fishtail dress. I remembered. The dress I'm wearing was indeed given to me by Ethan. But this is what Ethan gave me before the party. Why would he know? Sorry. I'll change it now, okay? I zipped up and hurried to the bedroom. Mark called me Nancy. All your things were packed away in the afternoon. He closed his eyes and asked. What do you want to do? I looked at Mark's cold attitude. Red eyes. I couldn't control my sobs. I don't want a divorce. I'm afraid he won't believe it. I walked forward. Actively hugged him. He suddenly froze. Finger curling. I pushed his neck further and I regretted it. Is it okay not to divorce? Next moment. He pushed me away coldly. There is a barely perceptible pain in your eyes. I smell that you have been drinking. He laughed at himself. Why do you want to treat me as Ethan again? Deliberately seduce me. Humiliate me again. I once wanted to take revenge on him. Deliberately get drunk and get close to him. And his restraint and alienation completely irritated me. If he is really so clean, why did you touch me that night? The video was also released to the public. I was angry. I took off all my clothes and rushed into the bathroom. In his stunned look. Hooking his neck. Kissed. I'm pressing forward. He was unmoved at first. Gradually disintegrated. I am happy to let you vent. The sound of water dripping. I don't know whose voice is mixed in. He pinned me to the wall. My smile is gorgeous. Climbing his neck. Hooking his waist and teasing him. While he was obsessed. I put it in his ear. Smiling. Yelled Ethan's name in revenge. I still remember. His broken and dejected look. Now he doesn't believe me. It's my own fault. I looked at him helplessly. Eyes full of tears. Mark saw me crying so hard. Eyes drooped. Just give up on yourself. I've said too much. Before you go, let's have a piece of cake with my son. He turned and left. The moonlight is bleak. In our past life, there are too many regrets. Now I don't want to miss him anymore. I clenched my fist. One step at a time. Jumped towards him. When his pupils trembled, I kissed his lips. He is cold. The lips are surprisingly soft. I licked it with the tip of my tongue. He grabbed my waist fiercely. Nancy's voice is so tight that it makes her feel hoarse. Don't hire me. I'm not like before. Let you humiliate. I kissed her more deeply. I'll cheat you again. Can you just lock me up so I can never leave you? Mark's breathing hitched. It's like a wild animal is tearing off the disguise of indifference bit by bit. Previous life. I also found out by chance. Mark built a basement. It's all my stuff. The person he locked up was himself. The years of divorce. He went crazy. He was afraid he couldn't help but lock me up. I locked myself up first. I hugged him tighter. I'm serious this time. Suddenly. A strong light suddenly shot out. The whistle is blaring. Mark suddenly wakes up. He subconsciously protected me behind him. Ethan is sitting in the car, staring at Mark with sinister eyes. Next moment. Mark's phone rang. Ethan's gloomy and provocative voice came from the phone. Let her down. Mark hung up the phone expressionlessly. He turned and looked at me. Adam's apple rolling. It's your freedom to like Ethan. But I don't want the kids to see it. He is still young. The one I care about most is you, my mother. Please. My eyes widened. He wouldn't think. I called Ethan here on purpose to provoke him. When I returned from the balcony. Frank is looking forward to it, holding a small cake. See me coming out. He ran a few steps excitedly holding the cake. After meeting my gaze. His face turned red. He walked over hesitantly. Mother. The first one is for you. Afraid I'd refuse. He kept looking at me nervously. Small eyebrows. Wrinkled out the word. I took a bite. His eyes instantly curved into small crescents. Very sweet. I said. Frank spun around in joy. Well. The little ones are much easier to coax than the big ones. I looked at Mark. The corners of his mouth just curved. Straightened instantly. Suddenly. There was a rough knock on the door outside. Mark's face was as cold as ice. I wanted to ignore. But the knocking on the door outside was getting louder and louder. Frank glanced towards the door in fear. I gently comforted Frank, don't be afraid. My mother's colleague has something to ask my mother. Mom, go out and deal with it. Frank, can you eat the cake first? Frank heard. The whole face wrinkled. He grabbed my skirt and wouldn't let go. Mark said in a deep voice. Frank glared at Mark. Reluctantly let go of my hand. Then I looked at my mother eagerly. I'll wait for you to come back. I patted his head to reassure him. Mom must come back to celebrate Frank's birthday. Frank's face. This is how I smiled again. Before going out. Mark is standing at the entrance. Looking at what I can't do. Why promise? Frank is very stubborn. He can't wait for you to come back tonight. Refusal to go to sleep. He thought I was leaving. I paused to change my shoes. I called Ethan outside the door in front of him. Nancy. Are you okay? Is Mark forcing you again? Mark heard. Lower your eyes and leave. I held his hand firmly. Tell Ethan that Mark didn't push me. Now I want to celebrate my son's birthday. Please leave. I used to like Ethan. Our childhood love. I had a crush on him since I was young. But he kept playing dumb. Neither reject nor accept. Even that drunken time. There are also his handwriting. Just because. He wants to grab an important project from Mark. Want to make him a target of public criticism. Pity. When I know. It's too late. Aren't you divorced? Mark's fingers slipped from my palm. I forced him to hold my fingers together. Yelling at Ethan that this is a matter between us as a couple. Ethan, you've crossed the line. Ethan sneered at Nancy. Are you mad at me? Okay. Don't regret it. After a while. There was the sound of a car starting outside. I looked at Mark, expecting praise. He just glanced at me. Then I turned around and left. My son is waiting for you. Is it possible? He thinks I'm taking advantage of him. Are you trying to make Ethan jealous? I'm so mad. Soft is not good. Do I have to be tough with him? Tie him up and teach him a lesson. Maybe I'll be honest. Frank is particularly excited tonight. Mark and I took turns to coax him to sleep. I took a good bath. When I came out barefoot wearing Mark's shirt. Mark is wearing a pair of silver-rimmed glasses. Holding his son's storybook. Noble and elegant. Abstinence. He paused. The moment his eyes fell on my white neck. I restrained myself and took it back. He closed his eyes and asked Nancy. What do you want to do? There are no clothes for me here. Only wear yours. I stepped on my right foot helplessly. Mark walked quickly and went to bed early. I'm in a hurry to catch up. Because the floor is slippery. Fell down. Mark paused. He picked me up nervously. Frowning. It's nothing serious. My knees are bruised. While he's spraying me with medicine, I raised my foot and stepped on his bulging chest, deliberately revealing the spring scenery at the bottom of the shirt. But Mark's male morality is outrageous. His eyes are cold. Use your pajamas to wipe my wet feet clean. Get up and go. I'm angry. She turned over and sat on his waist. Mark. I want you. He looked up at me. Even my breathing is tense. His expression is cold and stubborn. He wants to humiliate me. If I feel. Sit down. As I expected. Really stubborn. The veins on his neck suddenly popped up. Mark turned his face away in panic. The neck and chest are all red. With the suppressed breath. Ups and downs. I grabbed his hair roughly. Let his neck be fully exposed to my sight. Mark. I'm like this. Satisfy me. He closed his eyes bitterly. Like falling into a trap willingly. I'm so mad. Holding his earlobe. My husband. Look at me. His knuckles on the bedsheet tensed instantly. White fingertips. I kissed up little by little. Lift up his pajamas like a puppy. Fingers wandering in. He shuddered slightly. Still unmoved. Seems to be resisting me. Or maybe it's a rebellion against my inner self. I can only hug him tighter. Want him to believe. I did all this willingly. I bite the buttons one by one. Rumpled his pajamas. His unique cold fragrance is rampant on my nose. Makes me excited. Mark. I called him over and over again. My fingertips stroked his rolling Adam's apple. When I put my fingers on his belly, he suddenly lowered his eyes. Like a beast out of its cage. Suddenly pushed me on the bed. He hugged me from behind. Stick to me tightly. Against me. The sound of a throbbing heart. Deafening through the chest. I can't help but curl my toes. Both looking forward to and afraid of. After a while. Mark said in a hoarse voice, Nancy. Don't push me. For the sake of gambling. Not worth it. He is more gentleman. The more I want to tear his disguise apart. I twisted my waist. Calling his name impatiently. The presence that cannot be ignored. Let me win. I pushed Mark to his limit. Nancy. I nuzzled his neck. Suddenly. He lifted my waist. Turn me over. Put your hands on my ears. The eyes kissed tightly. Even the breath is robbed. He wanted to teach me a lesson. Let me pay for my provocation. Brain chaos. My eyes are filled with mist. Mark maintains his remaining sanity. Staring at me fiercely. You want to go now? There's still time. How is it possible? I couldn't ask for more. I climbed up his neck and kissed him. Replied to him silently. Finally, it's what I wanted. I held his fingers tightly. Mark's eyes are wet. I just opened my mouth. He covered my mouth. It's too late to beg for mercy now. I was turned over by him. Kneeling at the head of the bed. He pressed my waist. Nancy. You asked for it. Previous life. Mark in front of me. Always looked cold and distant. He would rather lock himself up. Don't want to hurt me. So that. I didn't expect. The beast released tonight will be so fierce. Calm and self-controlled. Self-discipline and restoration of propriety. This is my biggest misunderstanding of Mark. Etc. I just opened my mouth. He held my chin and kissed me. Completely blocked my words. Broken words. Unable to resist. Can only bear. I finally found a chance to beg for mercy. Mark looked hurt. What are you playing at? I swallowed my words back. He has suffered for too long. I smiled. Hold on to his shoulders. Kissed his frowning brow. Mark. What do you want? All. I'll give you all. He was suddenly tamed. Soften your movements. A wet patch on the neck. Mark whispered in my ear. Whispering threats to Nancy. Tomorrow you will either deny it or. I'm just like you said. Lock you up. Close up. I whispered in agreement. Suddenly. My phone is ringing. It's Ethan. My sweaty fingers are about to hang up. Fingers tremble. But I missed the call. The sound from the phone. It came over intermittently. Sister. Ethan is drunk. Clamoring to see you. We can't do anything. Can you come over here? The person who has just been appeased. Getting crazy again. I have to start worrying about my waist. Roll. I hung up the phone with gritted teeth. It took a lot of effort for me to coax Mark into submission. This is a complete failure. On the brink of collapse. I hold Mark. Intermittent speech. Mark, I don't like basements. Pitch black. Can you lock me in a room with a window? I like beautiful flowers. Plant a circle outside. It would be best if I could see it as soon as I opened the window. Mark suddenly paused. Like an octopus. Wrapping me tightly in his arms. The voice is seductive and delicate. Who made you my husband? What are you calling me? Husband. My waist will probably be broken tomorrow morning. He held me and went to the window to look at the moonlight. Pointing to the lawn downstairs. Carefully plan which types of flowers to plant. Many, many kinds. Until I completely lost consciousness. Wake up in a daze. It's Mark who's wiping it for me. I muttered unconsciously. He fell into a complete sleep. Wake up again. It feels like a different world. The heavy curtains blocked out all light. A pair of eyes looked at me almost greedily. Woke up. Mark sat on the bed. I don't know how long you stared at me. When I looked at him. His eyes are still cold. I looked at the scratches on his chest and back. My face was hot last night. You are drunk. Mark's tone was calm. Lift the quilt and get out of bed. I didn't panic and chase after him. I fell back on the bed in pain. Depend on. You can't let me work all night for nothing. Are you okay? It's not because of you. I punched him in the chest. Mark looked ashamed and apologetic. I even eat lunch in bed. Sleep until 5 p.m. Open your eyes again. Mark is in a video conference. Frank, who was coming home from school, stood on tiptoe and looked out the door. I didn't dare to come in. I looked back and forth several times. See, I woke up. He opened his hands. Rushed over like a firecracker. Unfortunately, I ran halfway. He was picked up by his father by the collar. Frank twists his father in Mark's arms. Can you give your mother to me? Please, please. The homework assigned by the teacher is completed. Frank puffed out his chest and finished. Then Daddy will accompany you to practice piano. Frank pouted in frustration. Dad. How could you do this? After washing. I'm worried about not having clothes that fit me. The cloakroom is filled with current big-name dresses. Are you jealous? I curled my lips and smiled. Change your clothes and go out. A big and a small one playing the piano in the living room. Frank is practicing the piano. While secretly looking at me. Mark mercilessly exposed his double-mindedness. Frank was not to be outdone, but his father was clearly peeking too. I watched this scene. My nose can't help but start to feel sour again. At the dinner table. Frank said he was deducted a red flower today. Mom, do you want to know why I was deducted the red flower? He blinked his eyes. Ask me quickly, ask me quickly. I asked why. He looked at Mark. I also looked at Mark. Under our expectant gaze. Mark asked himself calmly. Frank hesitated to speak. Finally, my face turned red. Keep your head down, okay? I'm late for school. Mark then chuckled and said, because I want to wait for you to have breakfast together. I ended up being late for school. Oops. Frank immediately covered his face. Look at me through your fingers. 1 or 2 are both sultry. But. I said sorry, Frank. Mom really can't get up in the morning. But. I can have dinner with you. He jumped up again. Night. Mark is taking a shower in it. I listened to the sound. Open the door. Leaning against the door and looking. His eyelashes are dripping with water. Look at me. I don't like being watched. Mark's eyelashes trembled. I raised my eyes tonight. His wet hands. Hold me. Pulled me in. My hand is on his chest and you haven't answered me yet. He was silent for a moment. Accept your fate. From the bathroom to the bed. Until there was a knock on the door. Mark is gathering strength. I fell into his arms and laughed. He looked gloomy. Put on your clothes. Go open the door. Frank is holding his little pillow. Mom. Dad, I'm having a nightmare. He poked his head and looked into the bedroom. Can I still tell a story today? You're a man, right? But I'm obviously a baby. 5 minutes later. Frank sleeps between us. Mark puts on his glasses. Start reading fairy tales. Wait until Frank falls asleep. Mark took him back. I yawned and felt sleepy. Mark held my waist. The resentment is heavy. The next day, I received flowers from Ethan. He made a big splash. Had it delivered to my home. Obviously, he wanted to provoke Mark. Weekend. Frank is also. He looks gossipy. Did his dad give it to his mom? Mark lowered his eyes. Deliberate avoidance. I immediately threw the flowers into the trash can. No matter how I explain. Mark's reactions were all indifferent. I was so angry that I grabbed his tie and said, "You never sent me flowers. You don't like me at all?" Mark looked down at me. "Nancy, you don't have to look so bitter." I tried to blink my sour eyes. Squeeze out tears. Mark panicked. I didn't. I turned my back. I don't want to listen with a crying voice. Nancy. Mark was silent for a moment. Confession. I shouldn't have believed you. I turned around and hugged him. Frankly speaking, Mark. I used to like Ethan. But that was a long time ago. I don't like him anymore. The person I like now is you. We still have a son, so let's live a good life, okay? Good. Mark's words seemed to carry a lot of weight. It made my heart tremble. Tears rolled down silently. That evening, Mark hired a gardener. Preparing to convert lawn into flower bed. Thinking of the absurd things that happened the night before. I couldn't help but blush. Mark will guide you throughout the process. Frank is at the age where he likes to play. A man squatted in the corner, digging a hole and planting flowers. Get yourself covered in mud. Then she rushed to me like offering a treasure. These are the flowers Frank planted for you. In the future, it will be more beautiful than all the flowers in the yard. This is what Frank watered with love. His face is red. The whole person twisted around shyly. Mark stood aside. Look at him coldly and water him more. The flowers were drowned by you. Ah. Frank is holding a small shovel. Pale face. Mark takes the little clay figurine in to take a bath. I am immersed in this happy parent-child time. Ethan's phone suddenly came. I hung up directly. Next moment. He called from a strange number. Sister. Ethan drank so much that he had stomach bleeding and was admitted to the hospital. Can you come and see him? I said since we are in the hospital. Then the doctor will take care of him. Next moment. Ethan's weak voice came from the other side. I know you are willing to be trapped with Mark because of your child. I can also help you take care of Frank. I will be a good father. How come I didn't find it before? Ethan is seriously insane. When Mark came out of the bathroom. Just heard this sentence. He clenched his fist. Passing by me. Depend on. Don't deal with Ethan. There has always been a gap between Mark and me. I rushed over and hugged Mark. Tell Ethan to send me the address. Then I dragged Mark to the bedroom. Mark's expression was gloomy. Nancy. Can't act anymore? What are you acting? Change your clothes. I slapped him on the butt. This shameless guy hooked up with a married woman. As a husband, you just sit back and do nothing. Mark's face turned slightly red. When I got ready and walked to the door. Mark is already waiting at the entrance. Suits and leather shoes are a bit lustful. In the car, he suddenly asked me if I did it. Are you distressed? Mark asked this question. It doesn't seem like a joke. I immediately said that I only felt sorry for you, my husband. Mark's domineering and cold face. Read again and again. Push the door open. Ethan's eyebrows raised smugly when he saw me. Until he saw Mark behind me. The smile froze instantly. Nancy, what do you mean? I'm holding Mark's arm. Aren't you having stomach bleeding? My husband and I came to see you. Are you mad at me? Ethan looked at Mark behind me. Look of determination. But my family forced me to go on a blind date with the daughter of the Song family. I interrupted Ethan. I don't know anything about you and Miss Song. I don't want to know. But I'm married. Please don't do things that bother me anymore. In my previous life, when Mark and I reconciled, Ethan suddenly started pursuing me like crazy. At that time, he was already engaged to the Song family. Miss Song even got pregnant with his child. But he didn't hesitate to break up with the Song family. And leave the position of wife to me. Now think about it. Just feel ironic. When I was young, I have hinted to him countless times. He rejected me. In front of me. Talking about girlfriends one after another. Then I completely gave up. He did it for his own selfish reasons. Designed by me, Mark. Just because. He accidentally learned. Mark has a crush on me. When Mark and I are done. He started to act as the savior again. Said he would save me from the fire and water. Just taking advantage of my hatred for Mark. Just to deal with Mark. Later. I know the truth. Reconciliation with Mark. He pounced on me like a mad dog. I pulled the corner of my mouth. Ethan sneered. Don't act like you love me. 5 years ago. You drugged my drink. Put me in Mark's bed. It's you who makes me spend every day with resentment. Ethan panicked for a moment. Mark said this out of anger, right? Nancy. Do you believe him but not me? We have known each other for so many years. How could I do such a thing? It was obviously him who drugged you. He just wanted to trap you. Snap. A slap in the face. I was so angry that my hands were shaking. It's you. Previous life. Outsiders only know that Mark got drunk and forced me. Didn't know I was drugged with him. At that time, Mark was trying to protect my reputation. I just said to others that he forced me. I didn't believe him at the time. I think he drugged me. She also called him a hypocrite. Ethan's face finally showed panic. Don't meet again. I see you're disgusting. Mark rubbed my red palms with concern. We turned around and walked out of the ward together. Nancy, let me explain. Ethan yelled at the top of his lungs. Then there was the sound of him falling off the bed. He lay on the ground wailing. Nancy. My legs hurt. I was once kidnapped by kidnappers. Ethan saved me. A knife wound on the thigh. Whenever it rains, the weather changes. His wound will hurt. My steps paused. Mark grabbed my wrist. He no longer avoids. But whispered and begged not to look back. I held Mark's hand. Stride out. On the bus. Mark looked at me with guilt on his face. When did you know? I don't know if I should tell him that I was reborn from the future. Such a shocking thing. I guess he wouldn't believe it. I just said a while ago. Mark hugged me. The day I said in silence. Sorry. I hugged him back. What did you say? I'm sorry. You are also a victim. Required. He hugged me tighter. If I don't like you, you won't suffer this kind of injustice. That night, Mark and I were both drugged. Driven by instinct. Can't tell right from wrong. I hated him afterwards. It was also because of the misunderstanding that he wanted to get me. Play hard. After marriage. When I was with him. I am often confused. He clearly restrained himself and returned to the rights. Respect me too. But I was blinded by hatred. Plus, my mother threatened me to give birth to the baby. If I abort this child, Mark will attack my family. That time. My relationship with Mark has reached a freezing point. Now think about it. My parents also wanted to climb up the Shin family's big tree. You must have lied to me on purpose. Soon. It's Mark and I's 5th wedding anniversary. I plan to give Mark a surprise. After leaving Frank to the care of the nanny, I booked a restaurant. Just after I sent the invitation message to Mark, I received a call from my eldest brother Henry. Elder brother. What's wrong? His voice was very urgent and my mother suddenly fainted. Now in hospital. Come here soon. I just wanted to ask. He hung up the phone. I am extremely anxious. Get the bag. Rushed to. When I arrive. Mom lying in bed. Unconscious. What did the doctor say about the sudden fainting? Nancy. Don't rush. You drink some water first. Calm down. I took the water handed to me by my elder brother. What happened to my mother after drinking? Henry looked at me and suddenly laughed. It was nothing serious. No big deal. How could I faint? Sudden. A wave of dizziness came over me. I shook my head. I looked at my relatives in amazement. You. Complete loss of consciousness. Open your eyes again. I was locked in the old room. The door is locked. Can't get out at all. I looked around. Pick up a chair and smash the door. Henry, get over here. After a while. Henry came in, playing with my phone. Nancy. Married for several years. I'm not that good at it. My temper has gotten a lot worse. I looked at him warily. What do you want to do? Of course my brother wants to help you. He smiled and handed the phone to me. We are indeed siblings. We are so in tune with each other. You even thought of an excuse for me in advance. I asked nervously, what do you want to do to Mark? He laughed. Haven't you always wanted to divorce Mark? Just wait and see Mark's downfall. Taken away by the police. Guess what? The crime of rape. How many years will he be sentenced to? But don't worry. Custody of your son. I'll help you get it. Mark's property is also. I pushed him away and ran out. Henry dragged me back to the bed. Nancy. I'm here to help you get revenge. You said I wanted him to drink in your name. Will he drink this wine? I held his hand. I stared at him and asked, so 5 years ago. I was drugged and sent to Mark's bed. You also acquiesced. Henry laughed at my naivety. My dear sister, you are just now reacting. You should thank Mark for liking you. Otherwise, you never know whose bed it's landed on. I feel cold all over. My heart aches so much that it's paralyzed. Henry, you're my brother. So you sacrifice for me as a sister. Isn't it natural? The door slammed shut. The bedroom door was locked again. I collapsed and smashed the door with a chair. The result is only in vain. I lay on the door in embarrassment. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew over. I turned and looked out the window. Second floor. There is a lawn downstairs. I made up my mind. Adrenaline rush. I don't know how I had the courage to jump. Until waves of dull pain exploded in my body. I curled up on the ground for a while. Climbed up. Sneaking into the garage. He drove out. I know the address of the restaurant. Henry is going to take action. The hotel will only book the one upstairs. Can't call the police. Henry found a woman to frame him. Maybe they will turn the tables on me. This kind of thing. I can't explain it at all. I didn't know until I got to the hotel. Henry actually used my ID card to check in. I ran all the way. Hope to be in time. Run to the door. I knocked on the door in panic and Mark opened it. The door opened a crack. Suddenly, a hand pulled me in. Mark has a terrifying aura. Push me against the door. Nancy. Are you here to catch an adulterer? He whispered in my ear in a gloomy voice. Sorry to disappoint you. I tried to turn around. But he pressed me against the door and I couldn't move. It's not my doing. Sorry. I'm late. Mark's grip suddenly loosened. She fell into my arms, all hot. Mark. I hold him. Hurriedly said. Call an ambulance. Right. Call an ambulance. Mark held my hand. Wait a minute. What are you waiting for? Until I saw. In the room, a woman was tied to a chair with a sheet and screamed. After a while, his bodyguard took the woman away from the room. And Mark's patience has reached its limit. He gritted his teeth. Arch your back. The whole person is shaking because of the effect of the medicine. A tempting red on the body. Sweat drops down. I hugged him painfully. I kissed his trembling eyelashes. Can I help you? No. Nancy will be unhappy. She will blame me. She hates me forcing her. He seemed to be thinking of that day 5 years ago. So I tried my best to endure. I watched him scratch his arms and leave bloody marks. To maintain sanity. But soon he couldn't help but stick to me. He rubbed me. While growling in self-loathing. Tie up. Please tie me up. I'm also afraid that he will hurt himself. So I took his belt and tied him to the chair. He tilted his neck. The look of being slaughtered. With a desire to abuse. I pressed on his tense thighs. He growled at me to get out. I sat on his lap. You made me tie you up. Isn't it just to make it easier for me to do whatever I want? No. Say one thing and mean another. I leaned over and bit his lips. He is a trapped beast. No matter how hard you struggle, you can only let me do what I want. Don't want. The chair could barely hold him. I'm so bad, please ask me. Mark gritted his teeth and persevered for a long time. Finally, it was on my shoulder. Whispering, begging you. Good. Until the sky turns white. The next day. When Mark's assistant brought him clothes. Seeing the marks on his wrists. I was so scared that I dared not even breathe. The look you give me is full of admiration. All right. I did go a little too far last night. But who makes Mark so attractive? Mark put on his clothes slowly. My eyes would occasionally fall on his wrist. In a few seconds. I showed Mark the red temperature. Cough. After a while. Mark looked at me and asked me about last night. How are you going to deal with it? Call the police. My brother also participated. He is this person. Never give up until the goal is achieved. After saying this. I can't describe the feeling in my heart. I never thought about it. My relatives will do this to me. I've always known. In their eyes, profit is above all else. But I didn't expect. I'm just a tool they use to achieve their goals. Mark hugged me and comforted me, saying that I am still by your side. Previous life. After Mark and I divorced. I haven't paid attention to his news since. Occasionally I also heard people in the circle say, Mark meets little model at night. But this just came out. It was suppressed. Later. Frank is kidnapped. Now I can't help but think about Henry. Mark's parents died early. He is the sole manager of this huge business empire. This is really too tempting. Or maybe. Even the fire in the previous life was man-made. The more I think about it, the more scared I get. I grabbed Mark's arm and said, Mark, I want to confess something to you. I was just about to speak. A cell phone ring interrupted me. Mark answered the call. The expression changed. I feel panic. I looked at him nervously and asked what happened. Mark hung up the phone. Touched my cheek. He smiled and comforted her, saying that something happened in the company. I need to handle it. You stay well first. Mark called several bodyguards to protect me. He left in a hurry. My heart suddenly became more panicked. The next moment you get the phone. I called Mark right away. No one answered. This time I panicked even more. Until I contacted his personal assistant. Mr. Mark is going on a business trip these days. I should be on the plane now. Lady. You don't have to worry too much. Today's matter is a bit urgent. But Mr. Mark will definitely call you back as soon as he gets off the plane. After hanging up the phone. My heart still can't calm down. I'm anxious to go back. The bodyguards who were always around me suddenly stopped me. Lady. Mr. Mark ordered. You stay here for a few days. He is afraid that your brother will do something to you. My heart suddenly tightened. What about my son? Madam, rest assured. Someone has been sent to pick it up. Henry failed to frame me last night. Send Mark away at this point. Then his target can only be Frank. Is it possible? In the previous life, he was the one who sent someone to kidnap Frank. Henry, is he crazy? Previous life. Mark tried to save his son. Lost half my life. When I arrived. He was lying in the hospital covered in blood. Frank was terrified. Holding me, I just cry. I also saw a psychologist for half a year. I was also during this period. The relationship with Mark gradually eased. But shouldn't this be 3 years from now? I rushed out to pick up my son myself. The bodyguard stopped me. All looked embarrassed. A terrible guess suddenly came to my mind. Is something wrong with my son? This life. I'm still a step late. When I arrived at the hospital. Mark is lying in the operating room for emergency treatment. The road to the emergency room. My legs were so weak that I could hardly stand. A terrifying feeling of suffocation as if fate has grabbed my throat. Until I saw Frank lying there crying and gasping for breath. He was terrified. See me. She cried and threw herself into my arms. Mother. Dad lost a lot of blood. I hold him tight. Sitting on the ground. As if to comfort him. It's like comforting myself not to be afraid. Dad will be fine. Until Frank got tired of crying. Fell asleep. I wiped away my tears. Get back on your feet. Looking at assistant Kevin. And a man in a suit next to him. This is me asking. I am the lawyer appointed by Mr. Mark. Jack. Mr. Mark some time ago. Entrusted me to make a will. If something happens to him. I need to make this will public. I know I might be unlucky for you. Mark actually even considered this? I smiled bitterly. Did you call the police to see Kevin's assistant? Assistant Kevin hesitated to speak and Mr. Mark did not ask to call the police. How can he be so stupid? In my previous life, was he afraid that I would be sad and kept this secret from me? For me. Henry and his men forced me to this point. I'll report. Frank slept very restlessly that night. Frequent nightmares. Until the sky turns white. Mark was just wheeled out of the emergency room. He was temporarily out of danger and was sent to the ICU. When Kevin's assistant told me the news. I stand too hard. I fainted directly. When I woke up, Frank was holding my fingers and crying until his eyes were swollen. Assistant Kevin was taking care of Frank and was horrified when he saw you faint. I hugged Frank immediately. Mom was just too tired. Mother. I'm afraid. Frank struggled to get into my arms. It's okay, Mom will always be with Frank. Let's go see how Dad is doing. Frank nodded. Since it was not yet visiting hours, I held Frank's hand, watching from afar through the window outside the ICU. 3 days later, Mark woke up and was transferred from the ICU to the general ward. The police also came to us several times to take statements. 1 week after Mark woke up, Henry and Ethan were arrested. Under pressure from home and outside rumors, I had to marry him. Only Henry hurt the person I care about most in my life. He must pay the price. After Mark was discharged from hospital, I remarried him. We have to make up for the regrets of 5 years ago. The wedding was grand and solemn. Mark's eyes got red when he saw me in my wedding dress. Frank is dressed in pink. And another little girl holding flowers. Let's be flower girls together. The wedding was more tiring than I thought. It was the end of the whole day. I lay in bed and didn't want to move a finger. Mark gave me a bath. Wash. We just huddled in bed. Frank held his little pillow and started knocking on the door. The door opens. He rushed in holding the pillow. But Mark stopped at the door. Dad. I want to hear a story. Frank pouted in dissatisfaction. Mark squatted down and reasoned with him. Frank, tonight is the day that Dad and Mom are getting married. So what? So tonight Mom can only be mine. All right. Frank looked sad and looked back every few steps. When I was tired and sleepy, Mark suddenly hugged me. I had a long dream during those days when I was in a coma. I dreamed that we got divorced but then reconciled. Mark said. I suddenly burst into tears. Why are you crying? Mark hurriedly wiped my tears. It was just a dream. I shook my head. Hold him and say, Mark. Let's have another child. I hope it's a daughter. But you will have a hard time. Frank is enough. But I want. I rolled over and lay on top of him. Tonight is our wedding night. You won't let me down, right? Just a gentle tease. Mark looked at me with more desire. Make sure your wife is satisfied.